Every good investor I've ever sat across from asked the same questions. Every buyer doing due diligence asked them too. And every board member who's doing their job should also be asking these. Those questions are, what are you worried about most? What's keeping you up at night? What are your biggest improvement opportunities or priorities? And most leaders can answer those three questions reasonably well. It's surprising how often it takes a little thinking, though. But they typically have thought about them. They have a list. They know what keeps them up at night. They just don't always know how to verbalize it. That's okay. But then come the two questions that expose everything. How do you know, and how do you manage it? And that's where the conversation often falters. Not because the leaders in the room don't care, and not because they're not paying attention, but because there's no systemic way of finding out what's actually happening below them before it becomes a problem that lands on their desks, fully formed and considerably more expensive than it needed to be. And here is what I know from a couple of decades of walking into organizations in trouble. Someone always noticed first. The signal was there, somewhere. A person had it. And the question is never whether the signal existed. The question is whether your organization gave that person somewhere to go with it and whether they believed it was safe to go there. So today, I'm going to give you 5 very practical tricks that can change that. You don't need all 5. You need the ones that address the gap most present in your organization right now. Some are hard controls, some are soft. All of them are things you can start this week. Let's get into it. I am Maartje van Krieken, founder of the Chaos Games Consulting and host of the Business Emergency Room, the podcast for leaders navigating volatility, complexity, and organizational chaos. Every episode, I bring you battle-tested frameworks, honest practitioner conversations, and the kind of straight talk that does not make it into most boardrooms. Whether you're in the middle of a crisis, coming out of one, or smart enough to want to avoid the next one, you are in the right place. Let's get into it. Thanks for tuning in to the Business Emergency Room this week. I'm glad you're here. I'm starting with a statistic that we talk about very often on this podcast. 60% of your employees have held back a concern in the last year due to fear of consequences or not knowing where to take it. 60%. That is a huge number. That means that this is not a you problem or a me problem. It's an all of us problem. It means with 60% that this happens everywhere. And this is a statistic for somewhat regular operations or businesses, right? All of us operate in a space where the pressure is higher, the emotions are running higher. And I'm pretty sure that that statistic moves up when the dynamics are more under pressure. So even with a decent speak up culture, right? If in large part of your organization, people do tend to speak up. And if in large parts of your organization or the majority of your people feel a sense of psychological safety, you still have a signal detection challenge because people don't speak up for a myriad of reasons, right? So it's not just for fear or not knowing how to say it. It's also not knowing where to take it or not believing that anything will happen with it anyway. There is a gazillion reasons potentially why people don't speak up. So just saying my culture is pretty good, I don't have that problem, I don't buy it. The other challenge is that the signal almost always exists long before the emergency, right? So somebody had a signal that something somewhere wasn't right, but somehow believed that there was no reason to take it anywhere or to bring it up. And so much of what we suffer through would be preventable if we actually would get these signals much earlier. So the tricks we're going to talk about work at all levels. You can deploy them at the call phase in the midst of your operations, but you can also use these between your board and your C-suite, or between a headquarters and its operating units. You can use this at any and all of these hierarchical levels. These 5 tricks are not to collectively are not meant to be a complete prescription, right? These 5 tricks are a set that has something for everyone. I suggest that you pick at least one to start with today. You can deploy several in parallel. They all work slightly different. There is something in there for you. If you do none of these, I'm pretty sure you are in that 60% category, as I quoted, or higher, and you will stay there, right? So these tricks are supposed to bring you in a space where more of your people in a timely manner will speak up about the things that need signaling. Trick 1. Trick 1 is the most straightforward one. It's the escalation framework. It's the most structural of all the ones we're going to talk about today. And basically, it's for those of you who like a system. We just put in place a simple escalation framework, and there are 3 things that must be all true simultaneously for it to work. Because one without the other teaches people, well, keeps you in the status quo effectively, because it will teach people that it's either not safe to speak up or that it doesn't go anywhere. So first, the system you sets up should have a name-independent receiver for any and all of the signals. So it should go to a place that feels safe, whether that's a somewhat anonymous box to submit it originally to, or a clear coordinator who's in an independent and safe space. So, but basically the challenge or the signal should be brought up to somebody who's not in this person's line, and they should know in advance and everybody should know where to go. Then second, you need acknowledgement of that submission, and it needs to be timely. So for instance, 48 hours. If somebody submits something, then within 48 hours, they need to get acknowledgement that it's been received, who has been assigned to look into it, and what's the initial timeline for when they should be expecting some action or feedback or whatever. And last but not least, there should be visible protection. So not in a policy document, but it should be observable behavior to everyone in the organization, that when someone raises these concerns, that if it was found out that it wasn't an issue or whatever, or particularly if it's also in the personal space, that things don't in a negative way come back to the person who submitted the issue to be investigated. And the equivalent in an emergency room is that everybody in an emergency room can call it a code, right? So regardless of their seniority, there's a basic set of rules that if you see X, Y, or Z, regardless of what it may be caused by or what might be going on, everybody can push the button and say, hey, stop. They have that structural authority to escalate what they see without having to navigate the hierarchy first or thinking about whether there'll be repercussions to say something. And that's what you're building here. It's not a suggestion box. It's a system with teeth. It might not need to be quite as anonymous at senior level. I would say that this, though, is something that you can have its own level at senior levels, right? But you can also look at the results of this rolled up at more senior levels to look for trends and to make sure that the leadership also truly understands what's going down, what's happening at levels further down below. So reviewing this as a leadership team at regular interfaces can be very valuable. Trick number 2 is a softer one. I personally like this because this is all about cleanup and cutting out waste. Trick number 2 is the top 5 frustrations ritual. And this is about finding the flags before they become fires. So what you need to put in place is that every leader brings the top 5 frustrations they hear in their area to the leadership meeting, whether that's monthly or quarterly, designated periodical leadership meeting. They don't bring their own frustrations. They bring a rolled up version, what their people are frustrated about, and they need to know why these are the top 5. So the idea is not that a leader 5 minutes for the meeting just ask a random person to give them 5 frustrations, right? This is about, okay, out of all the stuff I hear, I think this is my assessment of what the top 5 are, because I hear them from everybody, or they have major value impact, or whatever they are. A top 5 with some logic behind it. At all times, you need to make sure that at all times, these leaders are responsible to at least be working on resolving at least one item on that list. It should have a named owner, it should have status until it's genuinely closed. So the things that show up on there, you don't need to in the meeting go in detail about how you will resolve it, but you need to be reporting on progress and actual closure. And then it will come off the list and something else may come on there. I'm not saying that it's every month the same top 5, because you might have a third or a fourth or a fifth one on there that you didn't address and it simply stopped to exist, or it got resolved in between then. It needs to be a current listing. Why this works is that friction points in your organization typically equal dysfunction, and dysfunction equals frustration. So when you list frustrations, you're basically finding the flags that are not yet named. Something simple like this systemically surfaces issues before they accumulate into something that can't be ignored, right? And it makes the leadership team collectively responsible for the organizational health and not just their own function. And what happens, the beauty of an approach like this is what I see is that individuals at their own levels start thinking the same way. What are my top frustrations? What can I address within my own remit? And it just creates this good housekeeping at many levels, saying, hey, I don't have to live with those frustrations. What can I do about them? And if I can do something about them within my own remit, let's do that, because it is actually nice when they get addressed. It makes life better. And at a C-suite or board level, the C-suite can bring frustrations to an integrated C-suite board meeting, right? They might be filtered slightly differently, and there might be a top 3, not a top 5. And they might be more linked to governance topics where the board has a role. The reason I bring this one up is that if you would be running an emergency room actually gets audited on their systems and their functioning all the time. So I'm not saying the inner workings of an emergency room don't have any frustrations or any dysfunctionality, but there is a lot that gets audited out because they get reviewed and get seen. Somebody comes into the emergency room with very regular intervals to look for all the stuff that's not working, to look at the numbers, to look where things are derailing. And this frustration tool or trick, top frustration trick, is a self-regulating version from that, right? Trick number 3, the monthly difficult subject conversation. Again, this is a self-control. It builds a cultural habit in the team. And this one, I typically get a lot of pushback back on when I propose something like this. But to me, it brings the most important stuff to the surface fastest. So particularly in organizations where there's been loads of upheaval, where people maybe have gotten into kind of the wrong patterns, and there's been sustained long periods where there's been a lot of pressure and a lot of none of the normal, then this to me is one that unlocks the right conversations the quickest. So yes, it's uncomfortable, but those situations where it's been uncomfortable for a long time, if you want to turn around, you sometimes need something slightly more drastic. So yeah, most useful in organizations not in good shape or who haven't been in good shape and where people dynamics are somewhat difficult. And at the end of a team meeting, not the start, so that it carries through the meeting, at the end of the meeting, after which people can actually leave the room and take a breather, you need 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes, depending on team size. And you'll ask the one question: what is the subject nobody wants to talk about, but we probably should? What happens is that there will be some looking around. But in my experience, there actually is always someone brave enough to say it, but things have been cooking and they're just below the surface. And somebody will say it. And typically there is 2/3 consensus about what the 1 or 2 most difficult subjects are immediately. So if, let's say one person says, well, the performance of vendor X, you somewhat see shoulders go down. You see a physical reaction in half the people around the table and nodding, kind of going like, ouch, yes, yeah. So there is actually reasonable alignment about what these pain points are, but nobody knows how to start the conversation about them, or quite can put their finger around it or feels responsible for bringing it up. That's why this is so powerful. What you need to do then is not, as a leader, solve it there and then, right? Once you've got some topics out, pick one that got the most nods or came out the most forceful, and say, okay, why is it hard to talk about this one? What would make it easier? And what own actions can we take as a result to actually start digging into this, right? So there is basically what you're asking people to bring up is a pain point. It's like a doctor with a patient saying, where is their pain? You're not asking the team to tell you what's causing the pain. You're saying, where is a pain point that we kind of didn't bring up, but it's definitely not feeling right? And that's what this is about, practicing naming it, not solving it. And why this works is that every time a team does this and nothing bad happens, the culture shifts slightly. And over time, that shift becomes the culture. It creates space to name the thing that's awkward without having full vocabulary. And saying it out loud lets people see they're not the only ones who have felt that pain and know something is amiss, and feel empowered that the things that are not right actually are going to get attention if they bring them up. So an example I brought up, and it's a real example, right? You would think that something as easy as, okay, this vendor is no longer performing, is something that people bring up. But they don't, because people don't always know the dynamic of who knows who. So they might be under the impression that the sales manager has a very close and good relationship with this vendor, and is not going to be receptive to hearing, thinking that this party isn't performing, or this has been the number one or key priority vendor for everyone forever, or they make some really critical parts, or generally in the market, they're known to be a great player. So bringing up that they're not performing feels weird or awkward. It could be, again, a gazillion reasons that nobody says much, but that we all have to admit that something around the performance of that vendor has been steadily sliding and needs attention. And so it doesn't need a conversation to the nitty-gritty as to why or the how. It needs to say, so it could be that in that instance, the team lead says, hey, okay, let me take that away and go find out, right? If you're talking to a very operational oriented, say, okay, as a team leader, I'm going to take this away and I'm actually going to find out what the commercial organization is thinking about the performance of this vendor, whether there is any improvement plans in place, whether there is any opportunity for us to have feedback into that or input into that, or get some feedback on what the main agreed performance improvement things are with this vendor, so that we also understand and we can play our part in that, right? Could be a million simple solutions, but something concrete can come out of it without solving it there and then. In this trick, you might want to rotate facilitation. You might not always want to have the leader ask this question. Sometimes, in my experience, it helps to have a more quiet person, but a very trusted person in the team, be in charge of this element of the agenda and facilitate this conversation. Because it's just about naming it, getting the acknowledgement, and then taking some good takeaways or actions. And that might fall more on the leadership. In my experience, if you do something like this at the board level, I think you can be more blunt. You should be able to be more blunt. The question I sometimes ask is, okay, what's the elephant in the room? Do we have one? Is there a subject between us that seems to be sitting there and we're not talking about it? What is it? And why is it an issue? And when are we going to talk about it? If not now, and who will prep and lead that conversation? All right, trick number 4, the traffic light pulse. This one is my go-to in organizations that are very sizable from an operations perspective and have a very large ratio of operating and working levels versus management or leadership. Like a large manufacturing company, for instance, with a big, wide base pyramid as an organization, organizational shape. Because this is particularly useful when direct contact between the coalface and the leadership is just simply limited by volume, right? Yes, there is always more leadership can do to keep on engaging with people at all levels of the organization. But at some point, you run out of daytime, right? And you still want to capture some of these flags and some of these signals. So this is a very simple thing, once a month at a point that everybody has to go through, right? So it could be at the once a month point where people need to submit their timesheets or where they get their rosters for the next month. Whatever check-in point already exists, a simple 10-question traffic light check appears. And it's red, amber, and green only. No massive definitions around it. It's gut instinct response. And these are named dimensions, right? And examples of these dimensions could be key interfaces between this team and others. For instance, the operations team with supply chain or with planning. One of them could be team atmosphere. One of them could be adherence to quality and standards. One of them could be customer feedback or workload manageability, clarity of priorities, whatever is most relevant to that part of the organization. And then you have maybe one optional open text field at the bottom. It's optional, but at least a little space for people who want to write a quick note. Yeah. It should take 90 seconds for people to click through that. And it should be anonymous and individual. Totally, right? And people should trust that it's individual and anonymous and that it's visible at critical mass level, right? So at least 20 people, if not more, rolled up into one. But the power is in the trend, not in individual responses, right? So a team that goes amber on interface with another department for a couple of consecutive months is telling you something that doesn't appear in any management report until it's already a problem, right? So you're looking for changes. You're looking for consistent, red or orange colors on subjects that are important, because that then guides where, with the limited time and capacity you have as senior leaders, you need to go and show your face. You need to go and actually talk to people on the floor to find out what they're thinking and what they're talking about. We've talked about in this podcast plenty and frequently about the people who actually know where your business is eroding value, and where things are working and not working, are the people at the customer interface, living your business day in, day out, right? So this helps you to focus your time and attention where to go and ask more questions. So this gives you the signals of where to look and where are things either not right or changing. The ER, emergency room equivalent of this is the monitoring of patients. Internationally and in the UK, they call it a early warning score. But basically, as you can imagine, nurses in an ER have take a simple set of readings at regular intervals of a patient, right? So, and yes, sometimes the machines do a big part of that. But what they do is that basically they put you on regular monitoring, and where your numbers are going 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or an hour down the line, if there is change in there, you might be put up on extra monitoring, or you might be put on reduced monitoring because over time you keep showing to be stable. So they use a similar traffic light system to say, okay, what is it that we need to keep our eyes on, and where can we start to feel somewhat safe? So this is not a replacement for senior leadership talking to people. This is about a direction of that. And it shows people at all levels in the organization that you care about their insight, which is empowering. I think you can also deploy something like this at C-suite and board levels. I would do it at the beginning of a meeting, and create some time at the end of your agenda to say, hey, this is what our traffic lights were at the beginning of the meeting. Any trends in there? Anything we see different? What else do we need to talk about, right? It's a quick temperature check, and dimensions in that space are maybe more like how are we doing on progress for strategic priorities, the health of our investor relationships, key talent retention, regulatory exposure, integration of a recent acquisition, subjects like that. And these days with AI, you can have a tool built in 5 minutes flat, right? It's not difficult to make something that can do this for you. Last but not least, trick number 5, the new joiner window. It's a slightly different beast, but to me, it's an entirely underutilized thing, because new hires have looked at your business from the outside, right? Extensively. They came in with expectations, observations, things they noticed in interviews and the assessment process, things they looked up about your business. They've shaped an idea about your business before they came in, and then that got added on by their interactions with you. And so what you should be doing is that after 90 days, sit down with them, not HR, not their line manager, somewhere senior enough though, who cares? And with a stake in making them feel good about what they found. And you ask them, what surprised you? What confused you? And what did you expect to find that was not there? So ask them questions that are not necessarily at their individual job level perspective per se, entirely, but about the organization, right? What were you expecting to see that wasn't there is a very powerful question. And the answers are some of the freshest diagnostic data you will ever have about your organization. Why this works is that you cannot read the label from inside the jar, right? And new joiners are an independent outside perspective you get for free. But that initial window closed fast, because remembering what was different about what you thought beforehand versus when you came in, people start to adapt and adjust, and they're starting to sink into the group feel and see what everybody else sees. Or they stop seeing what everybody else also has stopped seeing, right? the added benefit I see in doing this and doing this well and consistency is that having this conversation and visibly acting on what you hear starts new employees off immediately on the culture that you're trying to build. From day one, they get to know that speaking up about what looks funky or disconnected is not just tolerated, it's expected and it's welcome. Again, it's easy to see how you can do this at any and all levels. And the output is not a report. I think you should distill down from all these conversations the 3 things that you're going to take action on, not the whole laundry list, right? And you can, again, like risk registers, etc., roll this up. So for a leadership audience, you can roll up some of the patterns and observations that are emerging. More senior people who are, for instance, coming in as your new operations lead from an operations lead role in another organization, you potentially want a more structured and elaborate conversation like this, and you probably also want more than one person with them at the table to really understand. On this one specifically, I also want to point out the due diligence angle here, because this trick has direct application for investors and acquirers doing due diligence that I also, again, see not a lot of people using. You can ask to speak with people who joined the organization in the last 12 months. Specifically people who are now inside but were recently outside, because they still have a fresher perspective, right? They were somewhat where you are. They were on the outside. They came in. They will likely have slightly different answers to the same questions than the people who've been in the organizations for years. So again, what surprised you? What confused you? What did you expect to find that wasn't there? And what they tell you is not in the data room, and it's not in the financial, it is not in the management presentation, and it's not in the curated information that the seller has prepared. It's kind of the gaps in between, right? And that's where, your post-acquisition surprises tend to live. The consistency and the negativity or the positivity that you get in these answers itself will also tell you a lot. All right. So in closing, these 5 tricks are not just about catching problems early. They also build the organizational muscle of working on things that sit between people, things that don't have a home, that are maybe not owned by anybody. And building the muscle to work on those things together systemically, that's what creates a resilient business culture. And that's what creates that cultural change. Yeah. Building these open and resilient and robust cultures takes years and years, but these tools can create some really quick inroads. Tricks 1 through 3 especially build that business resilience, because teams who use these tricks, when they are confronted with the unexpected, they will handle that differently because they've practiced naming the problems collectively and taking own actions and talking about some of the painful and the uncomfortable and the wacky. That is resilience. Not the resilience in the value statements, the resilience that shows up when something unexpected hits. The things that sit between people and between functions are the things organizations have least visibility into and least practice working on. And those tricks build those simultaneously and provide you a chance to find out where those pain points sit long before they become something for which you need a doctor. So, we're returning to the 3 questions that should be asked and that should have answers. What are you worried about? What is keeping you up at night? And what are your biggest improvement priorities? And more importantly, how do you know and how will you manage it? If you do deploy any of these tricks, you will always have an answer. And you won't have a polished answer. You will have an honest and true answer. And that's the only answer worth giving. And you now also will know why these are the right answers. And the more you do of this, the better the quality of your answers, but more importantly, the better your business is running and the more your value is protected. So this is not just for the exit conversation or the investor meeting. This is for every day, because the things that destroy value in business always had a signal, and the signal almost always had a person who saw it early enough. The only question is whether your organization gave that person somewhere to go with it. So, in closing, one question for you. Is someone 2 levels below you had a serious concern about someone or something 1 level above them, or not within their normal span of control? Do they know where to go? Do they believe it's safe? And do they have any reason to believe something will happen if they bring it up? If the honest answer to any of these 3 is no, or I'm not sure, well, that's where you start. Pick one trick. Start this week. The first flag that travels and is acted on and is seen to be acted on does more for your organizational culture than any policy training program or value statement you will ever produce. Reach out if you want some help designing this or facilitating the first few iterations on any of this. I can help. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Business Emergency Room. I hope to have you back in next time. Thank you. Bye now. That is your discharge papers from the ER for today. If this episode was useful, please share it, subscribe, and leave a review. It will keep this emergency room open for business and makes a big difference for podcasts like mine. I am Maartje van Krieken, and this show is my own from start to finish. Produced by me, polished by the brilliant team at Hivecast. And remember, this ER is always open. Till next time.